Okay, so here is another major difficulty with learning to read. We have what is probably the hardest alphabetic language in the world to learn to read. Spanish, any Spanish speakers in here, or people who have learned Spanish on their own? Okay. Spanish has only 28 sounds, 28 phonemes. And they only spell those 28 phonemes a total of 36 different ways. That means almost every phoneme in Spanish is spelled by only one letter every time it's that letter. Is that the way it is in English? How many ways do we spell E, the sound E in English? Anybody want to guess? 8. Okay, give me a word where we spell E. Let's make a list here. How many ways?
A.
I can't read.
Egg.
Oh, long E. I'm saying long E, not short E. Okay. Weed. How do you spell it? E-E. So we spell E by putting E-E. Another word with E, but it's not E-E. What's another?
E-A.
Like?
Reed.
Okay. Another word. And how about I-E like chief? How about E-Y like monkey? How about E like me?
E consonant.
8 different ways. Is it any wonder that some kids have a hard time with that? So, Spanish, 28 sounds, 36 spellings. English. Some people argue 44 sounds, other people say 46. Anybody take a guess how many ways we spell in total? I'll tell you, we'll play warmer pullers. Huh? I'm half deaf, you gotta yell here.
300. 500. 1,000. 1,200.
Very close. 1,133 different ways we spell the 44 sounds in English. Now you know why it's hard. I mean, even when everything's working good, that's not an easy thing. And why isn't that way? Because English has been very hospitable to other languages. It's a language that has always been willing to adopt big chunks of other languages. Plus, the people who lived in England had a habit of getting conquered and taken over by people who had a different language. So the first time it happened was when the Romans came about, what, 400 BC or something like that, and conquered and stayed there for 500 years and made everybody learn how to add Latin into their Anglo-Saxon. And then they left, and then the Vikings came. And so they ran the place for about 300 or 400 years, and everybody had to learn how to speak Norse and started including Norse words and Norse spellings into the English language. And then they got tossed out, and then the Norman French came in with their French and ruled the place. They actually didn't get thrown out, they got absorbed. But by the end of that time, we had a whole bunch of French spellings in our language. And then the Renaissance came, and scholars rediscovered that the ancient Greeks were brilliant, and they had beautiful music, they had beautiful art, they had beautiful theater, and writing, and philosophy, and medicine. And so they went back sort of semi-worshipping the things all the Greeks did, and decided since the Greeks were so smart 1,000 years ago, we should imitate the Greeks. And they brought all kinds of spellings that were Greek into the English language. So, anybody think of an odd way we spell K in our language, the K sound? The normal way would just be what? K, right? But what's another way we spell it?
Q-U.
Yeah?
K-E-Y.
Yeah? How about Q-U-E? And T. Greek. So every time you find one of those ones that's got the Q-U-E that does the K instead of the K or the C-K, that's the Greek guy. All right, reading demographics, slight variations of this, but basically for me, here's what I say. I like the NAEP data that tells us that about 40% of the kids in America actually never become good readers, and about 60% do. So this is what I look at. I think what I call the 60-40 split. The 60 are mostly intuitive. Those are the ones that it probably doesn't matter a heck of a lot how you try to teach them. It's going to work. What we usually say is, as long as anybody tries, it'll work. So then you got 20% who struggle moderately, and 20% who just never get there at all. There's another 20% we talked about earlier. NICHD did a long-term, they coupled up with the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, that does long-term epidemiological studies, and between the two of them, they come back and they said they believe the rate of incidence, that is, these 4 neurological correlates of bad reading, that the rate of that happening in American culture is about 20%. So according to them, about 20% of all children who come to school with some issues in that wiring that's going to make it hard to play. Mentioned this story. 50 million school kids, so if you're talking 20%, you're talking 10 million kids. One thing that's interesting to do is I've done it in Ohio because I'm always going to the legislature trying to convince them this is the problem that they should help us solve. So we know how many dyslexic kids there are in all of the states of Ohio just by using this metric. And we know usually it's very good for predicting any particular school district is probably going to have that. Now, there's another cultural pattern that generates reading failure that isn't about these 4 neurological correlates. It's about what happens in extreme poverty. And children who grow up in homes afflicted by extreme poverty, actually wind up hearing 25 million fewer oral language utterances in the time between birth and the time they go to school. So if they're getting 25 million fewer oral language interactions with the adults in their home, what's happening in there? Not as much, right? Those neurons are not being stimulated that way. So kids of well-off families and professional families in America, usually, they did this study, they put tape recorders in people's homes, got permission to do that, and they recorded everything that was said in there for a certain period of time, and they calculated what the rate of word usage was in the different homes. The children of the professional families, they typically about 46 million oral language interactions, compared to the kids in the worst poverty of 16 million. So that results in low language development. That's before you try to learn to read. That's the neurology in the part of your brain that you use to learn to talk and to learn to understand language and to absorb more and more words so you can make more complex thoughts and more complex sentences. So that is another huge factor. It's mostly a really serious factor in large urban areas where you have large amounts of severe poverty. But that accounts for another great big chunk of American children who don't learn to read. The kids at the lowest end there arrive in kindergarten with the language development of an average 3-year-old, their oral language development. So they're 2 years behind oral language development, which means less neurology to work with there when you want to start reading. That's another big problem, but that is not solved by what we're talking about here. There's a set of solutions there. And actually, great work hasn't been done there yet. Alrighty, so that's a big chunk of information from NIH and FCHC stuff. What are the steps that the brain has to go through to learn how to read? There we go. Mentioned that already, complex neural development. Okay, NICHC demonstrated to us. All readers, all beginning readers go through the same steps in the same order. But they go through them with different levels of ease. The really intuitive kids may go through 1 or 2 of these steps with very little instruction, and in fact it looks like nobody ever talked to them about it at all, and they get really good at it anyway. Then they may have another place where it's not that way at all, where it's really difficult for them. So, but it's important to know that every reader goes through those steps. Because if you just see what happens, for instance, here's an important fact. Where people are intuitive, they develop fluency within that discipline on their own. They do not have to be drilled on it. They do not have to be taught about it. One of the things that's powerful about being an intuitive learner is you develop fluent command of it. Now, fluency matters. So I was telling a story about my grandson, Dylan, little red-headed volcano. Dylan was learning how to play the piano. He loved for me to come and listen to him play. For a long time, he was trying to learn this piece by Beethoven that every kid who's learning to play the piano has to learn. I do not know why. But I listened to Dylan try to play that thing. It's called PREVALENCE. Until Dylan played for me, I always thought it was a tolerable piece of music. Now I think it's just dreadful. And Dylan knew how to play every note in that piece of music in the right order. But he wasn't fluent. So because he wasn't fluent, his hands kind of hovered over the keyboard like this. And boom, you get that one right. And then boom, you get that one right. Boom, you get that right. Well, guess what? It was a series of sounds kind of flying in loose order, but it wasn't music. It never became music until he could hit those keys rapidly and accurately without conscious thought. Those are the three criteria for fluent. You can employ this knowledge rapidly, accurately, without conscious thought. He got it all right. He was consciously thinking of it, which was not music. Okay. So, yeah. So often we make a mistake when we see kids who are intuitive in reading. They become fluent on their own. And I will tell you, I lived for 40 years as a thoughtful adult in schools before the word fluency was ever mentioned a single time in my presence. Now, you can't walk 50 feet down the hallway of a high school or of another elementary school before somebody says fluency. It's so popular now. But as a concept, it wasn't. And it wasn't because successful readers, the really intuitive ones, nobody ever had to say fluency or talk about fluency because they're intuitive. They built the fluency themselves. So, the point is important here. Some kids can learn it themselves and it looks as if they skipped the step. So you could draw the conclusion that this isn't important to teach because I have some really good readers who never had to learn this. Well, they did. They just had to learn it by themselves. That's important to know. Here are the steps. So, auditory speech processing starts when the baby is in the womb. Partway through gestation, the brain starts to be able to hear sound. It can recognize their mother's voice. I remember when my son was being carried by my wife, then we were back in typewriter days, not computer days. So that baby hated typewriter sounds. And when my wife sat down to write, we were writing our grade reports, you could watch her slowly go boom, 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 boom. She tried to get me to type her stuff, but I am like a two-finger typist, so that wasn't going to work. So it starts there. Then the baby is born, and the baby is swamped with oral language, and the brain has very powerful wiring designed to get the hang of what sounds the parents make. Very good research has demonstrated now that every baby born in the world has a reservoir of neurology capable of uttering every sound in every language in the world. By the time they are 1 or 2 years old, their brain has specialized in the sounds in their own language, and they can often no longer distinguish sounds in other languages, and they can't utter them. You know that sound that is in Hausa, you know, the African language, that sort of kind of a thing that happens in the back of the throat. At the beginning, every kid can hear that and make that sound and distinguish it. At the end of a year, that's been subtracted out from their processing. Okay, so kids are very attentive there. Phonological awareness is the beginning recognition, phono meaning sound, being aware of the logical system that governs how sounds work. They start to notice at age 2, 3, and 4 how sounds work. And by 3, they can notice things like rhyme. You know, that if you say time and lime, they can tell that there's a pattern of similarity there. Prior to that, they don't have it, but then they do. And then, for the purpose of reading, this is probably one of the single most important things. That is the ability to identify the sounds in the spoken language speech stream. Listen to the sentence I'm saying to you right now. How many pauses are there between all the sounds I'm saying right now? What was the number for pauses? 0. There was no separation between the sounds. It was like pouring water out of a bucket, right? It just kept right on flowing. When you learn to read, though, what's a distinct difference? Every sound is separated. Okay? It's not that kind of connection. So that is one of the central differences between spoken language and oral language. Is that oral language, is all about this flowing connectivity between the sounds. Some kids come with they have weak wiring for parsing the separate sounds in a spoken word. So if you say blink, and you say to one of these children, well, what sound do you hear in the middle of that word? What are you talking about? It's all one sound, blink. You know, it's this big chunk of sound, blink. So a child who can't distinguish individual sounds in a spoken word, can't segment them and identify them and say, well, this sound is very different because it's, you get it. And this sound is very different at the end because it's which isn't anything like that. That kid has good phonemic awareness. He can segment and distinguish and separate the sound. That kid's going to learn to read fairly easily, I bet. But what about the kid who processes it all as one big chunk of sound? What's the first job in learning to read? A, learn your alphabet. B, then, what do you do with the alphabet? What sound does it make, right? It is the relationship between the symbols and the sounds. So, the first big thing is learning that within this word, you've got these symbols, and each one of them makes this separate sound. And in your head, you've got to be able to segment, because if you can't do it, how do you learn that this symbol is making that sound? Because your sounds are all clumped together. Okay, so this is later in my note. I'm going to do this one piece here quickly and skip over, okay? All right, I want to give you an example of how critically important phonemic awareness is. So we're going to play a little game here. I'm going to say a poem to you, and some of you know this poem. Some of you have already heard it. And I'm going to ask you what the words are in the poem. Please, if you're one of these people who recognize them, don't play this game, okay? Let's let all the other people suffer. Don't give me answer, all right? So, I'm going to say a poem, and I'm promising you that every portion of the poem is made up of a normal English word. You know the English word, and you know what it means, all right? So I'm going to say it, and then you tell me what it really says. You ready? All right, here we go. Maresy dose and dosey dose, little lambsy divey, kiddly divey too, wouldn't you? Get that? What's it say? What are the words? Oh, come on, folks. This is normal English. I'm not making this up. This is actually real English words. All I want you to do is tell me the words and what they mean. Maresy dose and dosey dose, little lambsy divey, kiddly divey too, would you? What is the matter with you? Normal English. All right, who's got a guess? I'll give you the first word. Mares. What's a mare? Horse, okay. Mares. Does that help? Oh, you can't play. Don't cheat here. Maresy dotes. Come on, what is it? What do you say? Okay. Mares eat oats and dosey dose. And little lambs eat ivy. So, in the context of what I was just talking to you about, why couldn't you do it? What was the central problem for you? You didn't know what? You couldn't segment them, could you? And when you couldn't segment them, normal English words sounded like gibberish. Well, imagine the plight of a child with low capacity to segment sounds, sitting in his kindergarten and first grade classroom, and all the other kids can segment the sounds and tell the teacher what the third sound in the word is, and you're still sitting there saying, it's all one sound. Stop. So phonemic awareness is one of those 4 neurological correlates of low reading performance, low phonemic awareness. Now, you can figure it out pretty easy in a screener. It takes about 35 or 40 seconds to find out who's good and who's not. And then guess what? Good news. It's very teachable. If you know that this child has a phonemic awareness deficit, it is actually not hard to teach the child to get good at it. What does that suggest? For us as a school, if we want to get better at teaching reading, what does it suggest? Should we just ignore this and hope it works out? What should we do? Find out who these guys are? Should we know? If we could know it on the first day of kindergarten, would that be cool? Because if we would know, then it doesn't matter how many times we tell the kid, well, try harder, figure it out. Okay, it didn't work when I yelled at you, did it? No, that doesn't work. If we could know ahead of time, we know that probably 20% of the kids, many of whom have this deficit neurologically, we could know. Then we could devise a program that really worked. Woo! So at my school, when this research started coming out, it was about 20 years ago. I read this stuff and I said, oh my God, there is a way to know this stuff. We could find out. So we started doing it on all of our incoming kids, and boy, they showed up on it, right? And what we found out was it helped us target the instruction. So a kid who doesn't have low phonemic awareness, we don't have to spend an hour a day getting their phonemic awareness better. We can find out that they're actually got weakness in phonological memory. We can spend that time working on phonological memory. So we can strengthen that neurology. We can build the synapses to get it started. So we did it with our kids. Boy, did it work. It helped us target our instruction. We remediated faster. Kids got happier faster. Moms and dads were happier faster. We liked it. We said, other people should know this. So we started a free early reading screening clinic. So one day a week, as long as you made an appointment ahead of time, you could come to our school. We did it in the 4 morning hours. And it would take 30 minutes for a kid. We'd take them in, we'd screen them. At the end of the time, we'd sit down with you with the mom and explain, this is where your kid is. You know, in this place, this place, not so much. And they started saying to us, well, okay, well, I get it. My kid's low in phonemic awareness and he's not going to be able to learn to read. How do I get that fixed? We said, oh man, that's not our job. We're just giving you the screening. You know, no, it's your job. You can't tell us this and then not help us figure out what's going on here. So we had to start a phonemic awareness program in the summer. So we began the summer school. It was a 4-week program. The kids came for 3 or 4 hours a day, and we did a lot of language activities, but mostly we concentrated on the phonemic course. And guess what? At the end of that time each summer, those kids were either at or very close to their grade level norm. It's very easy.
What age kids?
Kindergarten, first, second. We often had people coming when the kids were 8, 9, 10, and they wanted us to screen them and said, why are you bringing your kid here? Well, because I have a whole lot of trouble reading. But you already screened him, you know. We can tell you the things are the problem. You don't need to get screened to find out you've got a reading problem. But yeah, it's really good. Okay, so phonemic awareness. Okay, phonological process is taking these sounds that you can now distinguish here and learning how to put them together and take them apart. So there is a very handy little screener that you can do to find out, once they have phonemic awareness and can segment the sounds, can they manipulate the sounds in their head? If you can't manipulate the sounds, even if you can get them, but you can't manipulate them, you can't sound out words. Because of putting the sounds together, how you blend them together. Now I'm going to skip ahead here and get to a slide where I have a little note for myself. Oh, sorry. This thing isn't set up to show me my notes. Oh, sorry. So this thing is called the test of auditory awareness. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you see what it's like when little children have to start learning how to segment and manipulate sounds and how we can test it, okay? So I'll tell you to say a word, you will all say it together. Then I'll tell you to say it again, but leave a certain part out, right? Say cowboy.
Cowboy.
I'll say it again, but don't say boy. Very good. Okay, say slake. Slake.
Slake.
Now say it again, but don't say s.
Lake.
Say, gets harder. So the easiest ones to do are the sound right at the beginning, and it's better if it's a big chunk of sound than a little chunk of sound, like cowboy, right? That's really easy to do. When you whittle it down to one sound, like the S in slake, that's harder than the chunks. When you go to the back end of the word, it's a little harder. When you go to the middle of the word, and you got to do something in the middle of the word, it's even harder. So there's like about, it's called the Rosner test of auditory awareness. It's a simple little thing, and you can, anybody who wants to know where their kid stands on this, you can get a copy of that, and you can do it at your home and find out if the kid does it really well or not so well, and now you know some stuff. So now I'm going to give you a hard one. This is, for adults, doing this stuff, it's real easy for you because you do this thing, you cheat, you do this mentally spelling thing. When I tell you the word, you think in your head about how, you know how that word is spelled, and then you know which letters are the ones that I told you to take out, and you, in your mind, it's very easy to have the image, you just take it out, and then you can put the other pieces together. Kids can't do that. You do this with kids before they can spell, right? So this is a completely mental process. So I'm going to make this one a little harder for you so you can experience a little bit more of what it's like when it's hard for a kid. Okay, I'm going to give you the word, tell you to take a piece out and say it again, but I'm going to put a new rule in. You can't say it again without that piece until you know what that word really means in English. So I'm going to make your spelling capacity not work for you. So like in slate, when we took a letter off, it was still a word, right? Lake. So what's going to be left here is a real English word. So when you know the word and what it means, then you can raise your hand and say, "Got it." Okay, you ready? Say Germany.
Germany.
Now say it again, but don't say mom. You guys are slow here. You're slowing down. Which means
To go somewhere.
go on a trip. Yeah. Okay. So what happened when I complicated the task? You got slower, didn't you? So you found out what it's like for kids who aren't already good at it and can't spell it in their head. That's what it's like for them when they're trying to learn how to do this. So this is a very important thing to know, is that we can discover where they are in their ability to manipulate the phonemes, and we can find out what they aren't able to do, and then we can use that information to target our instruction and get them good at that. With me there? Okay. So now, okay, we're just doing phonological process. Let's get to the next kind here. All right, decoding and phonics. There is a system of rules that govern how the English language uses individual words or combination of letters or combinations of letters to represent the sounds. So I already did this. We already looked at this sort of complicating issue here, that we do a lot of our sounds a whole bunch of different ways. So we know we make the E sound 8 different ways, right? So this is tough stuff. The decoding and encoding rules of the English language is what you learn when you learn, quote, phonics. That's the system of rules that governs how individual letters or groups of letters represent the sound. If you don't do good phonics, you can't cope unless you're really intuitive. If you're not intuitive, you don't do good phonics, you cannot then cope with the 1,133 different ways we spell the sounds in the English language. The way you learn that is through phonics instruction. That's the purpose of phonics, is to teach you that. Okay. Can anybody think of a really odd way that we spell O?
O-U-T-H.
Who said that?
O-U-T-H.
Oh, you guys speak too quietly. I'm half deaf.
O-U-G-H.
O-U-G-H? Very odd way to spell though, isn't it? Think of an odd, but it's there, right, in the word though. Think of an odd way we spell, what's the normal way we spell the English sound sh? Okay. What's another odd way we spell the same sound?
C-H.
As in?
Chicago.
Yes. Some CHs we do that. Some CHs we go not sh. Some CHs we go ch, like church. And some CHs we go like Christ. Okay? All right, so you're right. Anybody else have a really odd way we spell sh in the English language? Yeah. Can't hear you. S-C-H, yes. Weirder than that.
K-R-Y.
Like in?
Like the proper name, Shashevsky.
GH. I was going to say GH.
As in?
Cough.
Yes, GH, that's even weirder. How about, yeah, who said TI? Oh, you win the prize.